So we are now recording, as you all hopefully heard. So welcome everyone to the side meeting. My name is Andrew Kempling. My co-conspirator for this meeting, Arno Tadai, as well. The purpose of the meeting is to really just continue a discussion that we started in Vienna, for those of you that were involved in IETF 113 earlier this year, just really to consider some of the issues raised by the introduction of Encrypted Client Hello, specifically in terms of sort of deployment considerations, if you will. So issues from the perspective of different use cases to be aware of. Our plan for this meeting is I'm going to share a little bit of introductory information, just so that we're all up to speed. I'll apologize in advance that any of you that were in the hot RFC session yesterday will recognize a couple of the slides, because unsurprisingly, the information hasn't changed since yesterday. But I aim to get through this relatively quickly and then leave lots of time for a discussion, and we'll just see where that discussion takes us. And we'll endeavour to involve the people who are joining remotely as best we can in that as well. So,
if I can just ask one question, while we're looking at deployment considerations, can we also look at the considerations as to why ECH for some of us is so absolutely critical? Because I think it falls into the same basket case.
Yeah, and that will give me an excellent opportunity. This will be on a later slide to say what, as far as we're concerned, is out of scope. This discussion is whether or not ECH should be a thing, should be deployed, should be introduced. So we're not discussing that. We're assuming that it is being introduced at some point in the future, subject to the TLS working group finalizing the design. So we're simply looking at some of the issues that it could raise and how they may need to be addressed. This isn't about not doing it, in case anyone thought that that was the case. We're not trying to have that discussion here. Okay, let me just do a little bit of scene setting. As I say, I'll do this pretty quickly because I've got no idea what our collective knowledge base is, and it's better if we all have roughly the same point of reference, and then we can have a debate. So just as a reminder, Encrypted Client Hello is a mechanism in the transport layer security TLS for encrypting a client hello message under a server public key. And that's a straight lift from the current ID. So hopefully that's an uncontentious statement as to what it is. It builds on work previously titled Encrypted Surname Identification, or ESNI. As I mentioned, it's being developed within the TLS working group. And the current ID version 15 was published, I think, last month, is readily available on Data Tracker for anyone that wishes to get up to speed with the latest document. So this bit is just reprising what I mentioned in hot RFC session yesterday. So just as a reminder, there are a number of RFCs that I'm going to just briefly reference. One is 7258, which sort of discusses the importance of protecting privacy, but also notes that making networks unmanageable in the process isn't an acceptable outcome. So that does need to be thought about. RFC 8404 discusses security network operations and management practices that could well be impacted by the shift to the increased use of encryption. And I guess what an assertion that we're making, which we may want to discuss in due course, is that some of the data that's encapsulated by ECH is of legitimate interest to on-path security actors We've listed some on the side: antivirus software, parental controls, other content filtering, and consumer and enterprise firewalls. So it is, the SNI data is currently used, and if it's encrypted, that does have implications for some of these other uses. I'll try and move that box so it doesn't obscure what we're saying. RFC 8744 talked about some of the issues and requirements for SNI encryption within TLS. And it does very briefly touch on unanticipated uses of SNI information, and very briefly assesses what alternative options might be available in the event that the SNI data is encrypted. And I'll assert that document suggests that most of those unanticipated usage functions can be realized by other means, but it doesn't actually develop that thought in any sort of meaningful detail. It really just makes a claim that that's the case, and certainly doesn't consider the affordability, complexity, or other challenges that might be involved in developing those other means. Nor the privacy implications that might be involved in doing so. So bringing us to here, we've been developing since I mentioned the meeting in Vienna, where I gave a presentation about the internet graph that we had there. We've been developing that document since. We published the latest version this morning, so I'm not expecting people will have read it yet. I'd be quite impressed if anybody's even aware that it's been produced yet, because we were able to put it on Data Tracker when it reopened. And effectively after IETF 113, we've set an informal group formed to continue to develop some of the thoughts in that text. And expand the content somewhat. And as I said at the start of the meeting, just to re-emphasize, this isn't about proposing to stop the development or deployment of ECH. It's making sure that there's an understanding about the impact of its introduction, which is an entirely different matter. I'm not going to share on my screen each page of the text and document, because that would be a really dull meeting. But I thought it might be helpful just to put on the screen effectively the table of contents from the latest draft. And the main area where we've expanded it is looking at the impact of ECH on enterprises and other similar organizations. So the scope of the text has expanded quite considerably in that area, as well as looking at the implications for small and medium businesses. And also we've added in a section on public network service providers as well. So it has moved on a fair bit since the original draft back in Vienna. But it's certainly not finished, because that's kind of the reason why we thought it would be useful to have this side meeting. And we posed, well, we put a list of things in the document which we believe still need further work. Again, you can see on the screen what some of those points are, which again, I don't propose to read those all out, so I don't think that'd be a good use of our time here, but please scan those. So you get a sense of really some of the issues that we've identified that we think need to be considered and need further work in the text. And there's just a second screen of those. So really we've sort of identified some additional issues, and we're hoping that amongst the people in this room, online and elsewhere, there may be others that are interested in this subject, which might be interested in sort of joining our informal group and helping us to develop the text further to cover those issues as well. So finally, really from me, what we're interested to discussing this evening between now and 8 o'clock, so we've got roughly 45 minutes, is to get a sense from people whether you agree that this is an issue that does warrant work, whether you're interested in working on it, if you think we've missed some important points, and we're pretty open-minded about that, and also from our collective wisdom here, whether you think the ID has a natural home within any of the existing IETF working groups, or you think we should go down the ISE route or some other path. Just really to get your advice. This is dispatch route, but it'd be useful to get people's wisdom on that. And then we'll start to think about next steps, perhaps in the last 5 minutes before we get thrown out the room at 8 o'clock. Have I missed anything on it? Fantastic. In which case, that's probably enough from us. So I'll stop talking at you. I'll remind you, we've got people online as well. So if the people who are remote want to join the discussion, please raise your virtual hand using the tool on Zoom. Otherwise, there's no chance I'll see you. I'll maybe stop sharing so we can actually see people like Paul randomly on the screen there. Hi, Paul. So yeah, let's just open it up to the floor, and if anyone wants to join the discussion, please do so. I'll watch my screen, and if people raise their virtual hand using the Zoom tool, I'll bring you in, but otherwise anyone in the room equally, what do you think? All points welcome.
If I may, Andrew, so I've given this a lot of thought, and I think that yes, there were discussions to be had, but I would advise you that any document needs to consider it from a kind of balance perspective. Because I think if you look at the deployment considerations, you also need to consider the balance perspective of what happens if we don't deploy this. And I think that that is very, very critical from where we come from. We're sitting in a situation at this point where ECH is our only legal defense against some very, very litigious actors that are asking us to block things we do not host, we have no relation to, and the only way that I can combat such legislation is to be able to say to the court, I can't block what I can't see. And so this becomes a defense mechanism. At the same time, I understand you've got the schools issue, etc. So there is a balance here. But when we start talking about do we need this for the deployment considerations, I'm saying that there are very, very clear problems of not having something like this. I cannot go to a Supreme Court and fight legislation based on it not being reasonable if what they want is actually reasonable. I need it to not be reasonable because it could put me out of business otherwise. Because when they say to me, go and block this YouTube URL, and my only solution is block YouTube because I can see that it's YouTube, they tell me block YouTube, and I say, I don't know. Another story. And it's a protection thing. So what I would say is, yes, we need the discussion, but any document needs to be balanced, and it needs to consider in deployment considerations, not just what are the considerations to doing this, but what are the considerations if we don't, so that you create a fair and balanced perspective. That's my take.
Duly noted, thank you. Other people either online or in the room that have a point of view, please. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, Paul, were you waving at the camera when I wasn't looking? Nope.
So I simply input a comment on the chat, which is to say, you know, with all sympathy for the desire to not go out of business, client hello does not include the URL.
But you see, Paul, that's the problem. If it was the full URL or not, then I could go and block it. But when the SNI as it stands, and I can see this is YouTube, the default reaction to the people we're dealing with is, fine, you know, it's a website, this is the top part of it, go and block the whole lot. That's what the current legislation says. If I can see the actual domain, the SNI, then I must block the entire server. And this is the legislation that is appearing now in 20, 30, 40 countries across my region. It's a huge problem.
Well, again, with all due sympathy for the desire to not go out of business, there are compelling go out of business stories on sort of both the pro and con side of Encrypted Client Hello. And I don't think we're going to be able to reason from either of them.
Okay, what do other people think in the room, either positive, negative points, Victoria? And sorry, I should have said, if people that are making comments, could you say who you are? Because obviously people remotely won't have a faintest idea.
Yeah, Victoria, the Open Exchange was also, let's say, a long time participant in this kind of discussion over the last 20 plus years in Europe. So I think it's a bit sad that we started on this exact issue. I think we should really find ways, positive ways to go ahead, because from other people, everything that the IETF has been doing until now is unbalanced, and we need to make it a bit more balanced. So I think that even discussing what is balanced and what is not, we risk not getting to any positive events, and we desperately need that. What I wanted to say is, I'm still an engineer, but I'm mostly a policy person, has been discussing with politicians and including non-technical people around it, is that I understand your desire to say I cannot do this, so you cannot ask me to do that. The problem is that the political people tell you this, is that this industry has explicitly worked and designed ways and deploying ways to become blind and then say, now we are blind, we cannot do this. And this doesn't work because it was you that designed this, become blind and not so as an excuse not to do. And the political people say, we don't care about any kind of technical limitations. We just go back to the design board and find the technology to build alarm. You can start by whatever. We just don't care. We give you the political direction, and we are. I mean, there's really frustration in Brussels, especially with the technical industry telling the politicians what they can or cannot do. Is that with the COVID apps? Is that with a number of other things? So, I mean, more political people in Brussels, again, very high level are not available to just say this cannot technically be done and just get what you can from. So, I mean, this is my personal assessment of the situation. I don't know the future, maybe it will work, so I understand the position, but I think that there might be pressure on the industry and on this organization to just solve the problem at a technical level, but they keep saying that this cannot be done and we cannot find a way to both have some kind of implementation of laws that, well, democratically, whatever the laws each country will decide and at the same time preserve the privacy of people to the extent that it's possible. Because this has been possible with the telephone, it has been possible with all using communication media, and non-technical people do not understand why they cannot simply come up with a way to strike us and compromise with the internet.
Okay, thanks, Victoria. Other people want to come in with any views on whether this is a good thing to do, if you think we've missed any significant issues, or indeed any other comments that you may have. And do please continue to pass around the old-fashioned blue sheet if it hasn't reached the far end. Paul.
Hi, Paul Lopez. Just because we were just given two examples of things where things were changed, and so we can do this for this new thing too. I want to give the example of the early times when horses and carriages were replaced by cars, and there were police departments in the US that said people cannot have cars because they can outrun it, they can go too fast. They did not get what they wanted. We all got fast cars.
Just remember to enable the owl cam, so it might actually mean that people. So just remember to switch on the owl cam, so that might magically start to pick up people in the room, the people remotely. Echo.
Yeah, Eric scroll up. And I think you sort of said it's worth doing, but I think that's a sort of category. There's a bunch of stuff in there. Falls interesting to me, sort of three categories. One is concerns about lack of clarity in the document. And those should be filed with GitHub case document, so that we can the second is I think maybe concerns about the operational impact on pieces of infrastructure that are not kind of virtual. So for instance, what would the impact of the DNS value which by the way is happening anyway. But anyway, and the third is commentary on contested questions about the relevant equities of various kinds of various entities in the system, in particular people which expect to happen, people which have to inspect. And the second category is also followed GitHub issues, and then the fourth we decided to engage with the third category, I think perhaps some say as a draft. Seems to be there's a number of drafts in this area. Say new pricing technology bad for operators, but like I guess super little. But on that, so that's actually good. So it should maybe one draft applicable because we have like a bunch of protection, well, potential commentary draft. It should be a 50 go.
Okay. Thank you, Eka. I'm looking around the room to see if anyone else wants to be bold and offer an opinion. Or indeed online. I can see a few comments in the chat, but does anyone that's remote want to come back into the discussion?
I'll put the chat up on the screen so we can see the time.
Yeah, I can put the chat on the screen. Where it is. So for transparency, the people that put stuff in the chat that are not in the room, that's now visible to the room. Try and do it slightly piecemeal, because otherwise it's difficult. I'll give you a chance to scan through. Give you a sense of what the comments are to date. Okay, so in terms of where we are then, I'm unsurprised that not everyone will be wildly enthusiastic, because that was kind of the point of having the meeting. But maybe if I put back, if I share my screen again. Just to give you a sense of some of the issues that we've identified that we believe need further work. Again, give you a chance so you can just scan those, and I'll happily share these slides afterwards with anyone that's put their email details on the sheet of paper, or just drops me an email afterwards, if that's easier. Are there people here that either would be interested in contributing their input on some of these, or indeed if there are other things that you think are fundamentally missing and should be added, that we haven't considered, taking the point that was made earlier?
I would the previous slide that you had up there,
Sure.
I would like to see a fair bit more justification on that third bullet point. I think it needs to be, if you're going to make that particular claim as it sits there, I think you need to expand on it quite a bit. Because I'm not convinced that the visibility of the SNI data and detecting and stopping attacks are as closely correlated as that point seems to apply. And I think it's a heavy assertion to make, and to make an assertion like that, it needs to be very drastically expanded on. Just a thought.
Okay. Thank you. And I see DKG has raised his virtual hand.
Hi there, thanks. I actually wanted to comment on the fourth point on this slide. If you think that there needs to be additional relationships described between, in terms of being able to deploy something like this safely, between the client-facing and backend servers, I'm actually curious to know what you think is needed there. Like, are you imagining a protocol for provisioning, like an Acme style, where a backend server can provision client-facing? Is that something that you're looking for in this draft, or are you looking for something else? What is? Can someone who wrote or contributed to bullet point 4 there talk to it a bit?
Sure.
Hi, Daniel. Welcome. So, first of all, we need clarification. I mean, it's very difficult for us to understand how this is working.
Is Zoom focus in the mic, Connor, or what?
Sorry. Is it better? Yeah. So, yeah, the question is simply at the moment clarification. It's very hard for us to understand how it works between the client-facing server and the backend server. I don't think we are in a position to propose something at the moment until we really understand what has been the initial intention.
Yes, I don't understand. Why haven't you filed a GitHub issue for this? I don't understand. Why haven't you filed a GitHub issue for this?
Do you mean a GitHub on the ECH draft?
Yeah.
Just for clarity, yeah.
Yeah. Like that's how we resolve it. That's how we resolve these questions. So why haven't you filed a GitHub issue for this?
Well, just one comment on that. When some of these issues were raised previously, I think during the discussion in Vienna, but forgive me if my memory is not completely accurate. I think some of the feedback was to save them to the working group last call, which I think was an interesting suggestion, maybe not overly helpful, but that suggestion was made.
Well, this is what I was saying. This document being a mishmash of text, right? This document is a mishmash of technical commentary and document, which should be GitHub issues or anonymous posts, and unfavorable commentary and general concept, which should be saved over here last call. And so what I'm saying is that please take the technical commentary. This is a technical question. This is a commentary. And put it in GitHub issues that can resolve it. From a cryptographic perspective, the relationship seems absolutely clear, the link between the client facing and the backend server. So I'd like to know much more specifically what your question is. Right, the link is very clear.
Right, so we can come back on that and try to explain what we don't understand and contribute, but it's just that it has been difficult for us at the moment to just regroup people to just understand the whole story. Many of which are new to the IETF. So give us a chance to improve here.
I have a comment on the third bullet. Relying just on the SNI data doesn't give you the right security, because I've seen several malware families using false SNI data. So they never say they go to malware.com in SNI. They always come and say they go to Google.com, right? And that's the typical modus operandi that many malware families are already using. So if you use a genuine client like a browser, it will always tell the truth about the SNI. But if an endpoint is compromised with a malware, it will always start lying about the SNI. So with that in picture, if you have a network-based security solution, which is purely relying on SNI, maybe you can do parental control, but you will never be able to block malware, which is the biggest threat, I believe, that we have seen with malware families.
Right, so it's actually, first of all, managing endpoint security is extremely hard. It is the case that we're trying to do it, and it's still not correct in many ways. So that's the first issue, that if you rely only on an approach which is on 2 endpoints, we are going to have a lot of problems, especially in the browser, for example. So we had some text in this version that we removed because it was judged as out of scope for this particular draft, because we concentrate on deployment issue. But the issue that is caused by malware are very specific, for example, manning the browser and others. So we have just alluded to that without going into too many details. But we have a number of reasons why we are putting this. The second is that you have a number of cases where you have no control on the network. They bring your own device or take people at school or children, you have no idea what it is. The only chance you have is to do it on the network. And on the network, the typical problem is the loss of the data gives you no chance to actually figure out how to collect.
Yeah, but why are you relying on SNI? Why are you not relying on DNS?
We rely on SNI and DNS when we can. So of course there are, I mean, a lot of people who provide solutions have a number of checks that we are doing between the DNS and the SNI, and our policy said that we are doing it.
Okay, we had a comment in the chat. If we could be aware in the room that the audio is not perfect, so if we could all make an effort to speak a little bit slower and lean into the mics.
I suspect also keep your mic off when you're not speaking.
Yeah. A question, a point over there, then there, then over there. So 1, 2, 3.
All right, I'm seeing that there's a couple of different parts of this that we're discussing. We've been talking about, commentary on the draft or on the advisability ECH or whatnot, and a lot of that has been already discussed. But there's another piece here, which is identifying the use cases that were previously relying on seeing the SNI, that are no longer at some point in the future going to be viable. And some subset of those things may be, there may be new technologies or new strategies for doing those things. Identifying the things that you can't do anymore and finding new ways to do them, if those are appropriate things to do, does feel useful. Feels like a useful piece in this conversation. Sorry, that's one.
Okay, thank you. So
I was next.
Yeah.
I see now the value of the encrypted feature. I have kind of a bit of a structural question on not something you want, a very kind of tactical question. What do you want to see happen with the draft? Are you looking to land the draft somewhere, or are you thinking the draft is a position paper to have a conversation? And if it's if you have thoughts on the forward and on the latter, then like bottom line, what's the outcome you want to happen?
So first, I think we want to have, so first, this is not finished. This is under development. Again, it started with 3 persons. Now we have 30 people in the background. It's growing, and again, many are not familiar at all with IETF, so we have a lot of issues to solve. Excuse me. that's going to be started. So what I was saying is that this is work in progress. So guidance is welcome. We started with 3 persons, started this work in Vienna, then 2 others, myself and another person worked on another document, then we started to see we good to merge, and when we merged, the group moved from 5 to 10 to 20 to 30 people. And again, many of these people are not familiar at all with IETF. Even can't say that I'm familiar with IETF myself. So we have a learning path as well and a maturity curve to increase. So the first goal is to at the moment to have dialogue to make sure that these concerns are known. But step by step, we understand that it would be probably good to have an RFC landing somewhere. No idea where was the best way to land it. Of course, we were suggested to land it in the TS group. Right now, we are not ready for that. We are absolutely not ready for that. We are just not yet at this level. Maybe next time we can organize that. So right now we are trying to get input. But ultimately, yeah, I think it would be good to document it and hearing the feedback. Why don't we balance the 2 points of view? I have no problem either. But it's good to have the feedback. Okay.
So can I ask a clarifying question? Yeah, so, what I hear you're saying is you want to document the as is or kind of concern. I mean, is that full stop? I mean, you want to make sure that the trade space is understood?
No, of course, we would like to see if we recognize the problems and what are you doing with it. But as you can imagine, we are far away from there. But yeah, if we can find a solution, then there could be many things we could discuss. I discussed with the product manager of a prominent browser maker who agreed this is a problem, and maybe the solution is to have a concept of subcontext. We have other approaches to the problem. We could have, I mean, in my draft, Aker and others answered me personally, why don't we just, in enterprise subcontext, why don't we ignore ECH for the moment? And yes, we might, but it's not clean. We are doing it like a hack. Is this what we should recommend to the community? There are other points that we make in this draft about ECH is coming. Now, it's the beginning. We understand why the SNI as a citizen, I absolutely understand why. Right? But the issue is that if you want to push that on some context, but just think of the state of the manpower right now to do any type of migration. We don't have the people to just do the basic job. So we should try to find perhaps solutions on what we recommend or what it is that's the best practice, or we don't know the answer to this question.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate you kind of explaining some of that trajectory. You're saying you may not kind of be ready, and just a bit of a commentary. It's fairly unusual that you this idea some of the participants are not familiar in the IETF. Typically, when you have an in-flight protocol being designed, so it's still not trying to against that, it's a place where changes can be made. The way you have a conversation influence the design of the things you come to the working group that's kind of designing it. And certainly if the protocol is done, you're talking about operations kind of afterwards, the protocol is done, sure, it makes sense. But it's still in design, and so this idea of talking about outside of the place where it's being designed, that is an unusual approach in the IETF.
Which is an entirely fair point, right? But I guess the issue is, for those of us that were in Vienna, either in person or indeed remotely, I think the net of the discussion there was, and I'm paraphrasing it to make a point, that the community wasn't interested in the input from end users. So what you said is entirely rational, but that was the feedback at that point, which is why we spent time putting more detail in. Say, actually, you need to listen to what end users are saying, because this is a real concern to some pretty major customers of many of the companies here. And ultimately, they pay all of our wages, so we should take notice of them. Now we've got a queue of people. We got sorry, we got somebody over here, somebody over there, and there, and there. So there's at least 4 people. I think.
Oh no, you misunderstand me. I'm raising my hand to ask Mike.
Mike.
Yeah, Mike. Well. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
So yeah, sorry, it's just, I've been waiting and it fits in quite nicely here. So following along with the intent of the document, what the actions are gonna be. I think I've been at the EDDI meetings and I've had some of these things that when I say this, I'm not saying that this isn't important, because it is. It's important to consider the implications of every protocol we deploy. This document, in its state of being a informative document, isn't going to have the impact you want, period. I just don't see it being. What needs to happen, that I think to address these kind of questions, because right now we're having some technical conversation, which is awesome, and it's about to get lost in the working group it needs to be in. You should open a new tab and we should file some GitHub issues together right here. And that way, come Thursday morning for the TLS session where this is happening, we can already have started those conversations and they'll be there. They have to be. They're not going to skip over them, right? So just as an example, one of the things brought up is a false dichotomy between we encrypt the SNI or we get to effectively block things. Those aren't the only two options. IP-based, and of course, I can't remember the words, reputation. IP-based reputation is a pretty common modern service now where you analyze the behavior of endpoints. You don't need to know what they are, nor do you need to have any control of the clients. But you see packets going to an IP address that your service says, it looks suspicious. And it's informed by all your other learning networks, and you can block that. And that's something that can be made as a service for customers that don't have the ability to stand that up on their own. I happen to know a vendor who would sell you such a thing. Tommy Jensen, Microsoft. So I don't want us to conflate and say that, because I agree, I didn't catch the name, but someone said earlier that the SNI is a lie. It is, you see it all the time. So that is something I would comment if I saw that on GitHub, so we keep this recorded thing going. But I worry that you're putting a lot of good and now starting to be repeated effort in a document that's not going to have the impact you want. Let's just do the GitHub right now together as a group.
Okay, thank you. We've got 3 questions in the corner there. I think,
If I just ask, can we just get the slide that you had back up there quickly?
that one.
Next slide.
Sorry, that one.
Okay, so what I would say to you is just a piece of advice for when you're writing any form of draft. If you look at that first bullet point, it says, if ECH is enforced, what are the solutions for all the above problems? Now, if you go back to the previous slide, those problems, to make an assertion that they are problems in a draft, you have to take each problem and make a very clear case of why it is a problem. Because at the moment, are all of those things problems? Maybe they are, maybe they're not. But the top bullet point in the next slide implies that they are without adequate explanation as to why those are problems and why you believe that they're problems. And I would say that you need to do some very serious expansion, and there's just some advice to the document on each of those points to say, this is why this is a problem, because you may well find that people don't view some of that stuff as a problem. You've got to make the case.
Okay, thank you.
So perhaps Jonathan already about that. Perhaps a different way maybe to approach this would be to say, we would like to write BCP, a best common practice of how to operate a network on which ECH is common. And then write a document that's about solutions rather than problems. And if you can't find a solution, you have to raise an issue on GitHub and say, it is impossible to, I don't know, have a client endpoint or I don't know, whatever in particular you want. And your problem will be addressed by the group, or they'll say it's not a problem, or it will be considered. But yeah, writing a document that's a list of problems isn't massively helpful to anyone. A BCP is what you want.
There's another point somewhere in, sorry, there's another point along here. Okay, sorry, okay.
Yeah, so I want to say I hope this meeting has been extraordinarily civil and pleasant and constructive until you said that people didn't care about others. And I think it's a pretty gross representation of what happened in that meeting. Tommy, I know, and the crew people, and we all listen to our users, and we know, and we care what the users think. And I recognize that using first entities are not be listened to, but to express that as if they're all the users is like really not very accurate. And protocol contagious operating situation. So maybe we could not do that.
Okay, apologies if that was upsetting. That was the impression I came away from that discussion with, but point taken. Just conscious of the time, as it's 10 to 8, just gone. Can I ask, we don't need to have a discussion here, but maybe in the spirit of wrapping up, those people that would like to contribute to a sort of further iteration of the document, maybe if you want to stay sort of in the room for a few minutes longer, we can have a discussion on how that might work. And I'll just check, does anyone have anything that they want to say that they haven't already said? Please.
So just one observation, I think, in one of the slides, you highlight the loss of metadata, for example, right? It seems to be rely on a premise that we have to cling to what we currently have in the hopes of making things work. I think there will be in the future some folks who may want to do something that's undesirable, right? In terms of making traffic even more identifiable. But I don't think we should base things on the premise that clinging to what we currently have and supporting some perhaps negative behaviors is ideal.
Yeah, and that's fair. I guess just to balance. I think it's worth also just bearing in mind that certainly from the perspective of a number of CISOs and others around, the concern that they have, and they're not in the room, so you have to trust me that that's generally the message, is that they're really concerned that by not having those things, their networks will be, that the attack surface that's been introduced against their wishes to their networks is fundamentally getting far bigger. And they will bear the costs of that despite not having any control. So that's, if you like, the other side of that. But I take your point. The world moves on, and I remind you, I said at the start, this isn't about not deploying ECH. It's understanding what challenges it raises to certain use cases.
Just to go a little bit further on that point, because I think that it's something that potentially you may need to address in the document as well. If we're saying these are the problems based on the current information today, that's fine. But it also then creates a potential premise where development of future technologies runs afoul of the same thing, because they've got the SNI, the TLS 1.3, TLS 1.2, or whatever. If I come into the IETF with a drop, because I want a new fancied idea that could make the SNI completely irrelevant, but be even more difficult, etc., you'll be writing another draft, another draft, another draft, because effectively, when you focus on these are the problems with this particular thing, you create a situation where people are relying on something that's there today and not dealing with the fact that this technology evolves very, very quickly. I mean, we've gone through TLS 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, things have changed, etc., etc. You need to deal with the fact because, yeah, there may be problems with it, but how long is it going to last? And are we sitting in a situation where what we're saying is potentially limiting development?
Just to directly address that, we definitely do take that approach in some things, right? Like, we still have lots of cubic on the internet, and so people don't like deploying DDR2 because it kills it, right? Like, you can't just say, oh, I want to deploy DDR2, and therefore anyone who's running cubic will go jump in the lake, right? That's not a useful position to hold.
I don't think that's what I was saying. I was simply saying that if we're looking at issues around something that based on the premise on the fact that the loss of specific information is going to create specific problems, we have to acknowledge at the same time that there is a decent possibility that that information is not going to be there anyway. And that has to be acknowledged as we consider concerns. Because if you're relying on a particular part of a packet to secure your network, when that particular part of the packet is subject to not be there, I would say the problem is not the encryption that takes away that data. I'd say the problem is with your methodologies that rely on one particular piece of data that could disappear.
Yeah, that's a valid point of view. And I guess all we're trying to do here is to make sure that there's an understanding of what the consequences are, not saying don't do it. I'll respond to a question on the chat from DKG, which is we are just moving this onto GitHub, so that will help in terms of the draft as opposed to other uses of GitHub for other drafts. Can I just check if anyone who joined remotely has anything that they wish to come in just before we close the call? I'm conscious it's always hard to be involved when the majority of people are in the room. I'm not seeing anything. Yeah, so yeah, I can see Paul's point there, which you can all see on the screen. Thank you, Paul. I'll just reiterate, if you wish to receive information, make sure you put your details on that piece of paper that will be somewhere, hopefully over the far side of the table now. And if you want to be involved in any sort of further development of the document, including adding in things you think we've missed, just stay in the room for a few minutes and we'll just coordinate diaries and so on for that. But otherwise, thank you everyone for your time. We're finishing almost to the second, which is pure luck. Have a fantastic evening, and I guess we'll see each other through the week. So thanks for coming. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, everyone, remotely too.